Hey, it's me, Nalthazar, and welcome to another Magic the Gathering Puzzle Quest video. In today's video, I'm going to be going over the brand new Planeswalker, Professor Onyx. So, let's get into it. Professor Onyx is a mono-black Planeswalker. She has a fairly unique mana set at +5, 4, 3, and then -2, -1, with +5 being in black, +4 being in blue, and +3 being in white, while the minus colors are going to be -2 for green, -1 for red. Her three abilities are Morbid Research, Painful Lesson, and Last Monography. The first ability, Morbid Research, is going to cost you 6 loyalty. Then you're going to pick and fetch one of the first 4 cards from your library. Then destroy the others. If the fetched card is a spell, copy it. That copy gains 3 mana. Otherwise, your opponent loses 3 life. Now, her first ability, Morbid Research, is a phenomenal ability. It is without a doubt an S-tier ability. You look at other Planeswalkers that have similar abilities, and they're pretty much all S-tier Planeswalkers. Think Rawl, think Karn, right? So this is kind of like their abilities, but in some ways better, because if the card that you fetch is a spell, then you copy the spell. And if not, your opponent loses life. Now, the life loss isn't very significant at level 60, and it's really not going to do anything for you at lower levels either. However, it is still something that you get out of it, which is kind of cool. Now, the part that I like even more is that the other cards that you don't fetch go to your graveyard. So it is kind of like if you're playing a deck that can take things back from the graveyard, like you are getting 4 cards for the ability, which is kind of cool because you're just going to probably get a bunch of the other ones back from your graveyard. The second ability is Painful Lesson. You're going to create a Painful Lesson token. That token at max level is going to be an emblem. It's got Magecraft 3. So the first 3 spells that you cast in a turn will trigger this, and your opponent loses 2 life, and you gain 2 life. Then, when your opponent casts or copies a spell, the first opposing creature with the greatest power gets -2/-2 permanently, and your opponent loses 2 life. Now, the actual bread and butter of this ability is that your opponent discards their first non-spell card, then the first spell card in your hand gains full mana. So this ability just has so much utility because you can use it if your opponent is filling up a card with a ton of mana in their hand and you have an idea that that card is a creature because, Greg prioritizes casting creatures. So you could go ahead, see that Greg's got a card mostly charged, use Painful Lesson, and get rid of that first card in their hand that they've been charging mana up for, if you guess correctly. And if not, the first spell card in your hand is going to get full mana anyways. So you can wind up running some very high mana cost spells. You can think like, for example, the Ultimatums, and really not have their mana cost be a significant hindrance because you can just use Painful Lesson and give those spells full mana when you need them. So some of the best spells in current standard are black spells. I'm thinking of cards like Ruinous Ultimatum or Eerie Ultimatum, right? Those cards you can just cast for free because of Painful Lesson. Finally, the third ability, Last Monography, is going to make it so that your opponent discards their whole hand. They just discard their hand. So they discard 6 cards, right? Then your opponent loses X life and you gain X life, where X is the number of creature cards in both graveyards. If your opponent discarded less than 4 cards this way, X is going to be increased by 20. Now, this third ability is absolutely ridiculous. It's kind of like in PvP an I win button, because if your opponent has a full hand, then you press this button and then they have nothing. And you've got, ideally, an awesome board state or something, but you've got a hand, so your opponent just loses 6 cards for you using your Planeswalker ability, which is phenomenal. If you decide to use it and your opponent doesn't have cards in their hand, then you're going to be doing 20 plus damage to the face and gaining 20 life. If you're playing a deck that's going to be putting things into your graveyard, apart from the obvious Morbid Research, then you might find that you actually have a bunch of creatures in your graveyard, and so as a result, your opponent is going to lose a ton of life from that. The Last Monography ability is another absolutely phenomenal ability. So she's a unique planeswalker in that there are legitimate uses for all three of her abilities in any given game. And so as a result of that, she has a very flexible kit that you can adapt to a great many situations. Now, the one sort of downside to Professor Onyx is that all of her abilities are incredible abilities that facilitate your collection doing more. So if you don't have a very big collection, then Professor Onyx is not going to be as strong for you as she would if you did have a great collection. Because if you have a fairly full collection of standard cards, or even of Legacy, if you wanted to try her out in Legacy, then you'll be able to do absolutely ridiculous things with her. You'll put her out and you'll be like, oh wow, this is very much so an S tier planeswalker for me. This is a phenomenal planeswalker. But if you don't have a complete collection, you're gonna start a match and then it'll just, she doesn't have any ability that just sort of wins on its own. It helps you win based on what else you have in your deck. So it's something to keep in mind about Professor Onyx if you're considering picking her up. If you have a big collection, you want her. If you don't have a big collection, you might want to wait and then pick her up later, right? So as for how I built around Professor Onyx, I wound up having to get a little bit creative because I wound up running some version of this deck quite a lot. And the issue is that Extus over here, Auric Overlord, is just so incredibly powerful that I felt like a lot of my footage, and I had like maybe 5 hours of recorded footage, I felt like almost all of my footage was just sort of like a showcase on Extus, which obviously means that I'm going to have to make a video on Extus at another time. So I wound up actually choosing to showcase some other gameplay on top of this. Now, before I transition to the gameplay, I wanted to go over why you're not going to see a lower level Professor Onyx match up, and that is just because her Planeswalker abilities really need to be maxed out in order for you to get the most out of them. There are Planeswalkers that have really good abilities, and those abilities are really good regardless of what level the Planeswalker is. This is not one of those Planeswalkers. So you are going to want to make sure that you level her up if you are going to choose to pick her up. It's going to cost you 80,000 mana runes to max her out. She is absolutely one of those Planeswalkers that you will want to max out. So I'm going to go ahead and jump to the gameplay. However, before I do, I want to give a quick shout out and thank you to Octagon for sending me this Planeswalker so that I could do all of the testing and all of the reviews for you all. So I really appreciate your all's continued support in sending me these kinds of things so that I could make videos on them. I very much appreciate it. By the way, I also did stream this, so if you didn't catch my last live stream, you can go ahead and catch that live stream on my channel. You can actually check it up. And in that live stream, I also showcase all 5 of the Elder Dragons from Strixhaven. So if you haven't seen that and you'd like to see that, you can go ahead, check on my channel. It's my most recent Strixhaven stream. So let's go ahead and get into the gameplay. Alrighty, so for this first match, I wanted to show you guys my Pauper Plus take on Professor Onyx. It's not a bad deck, it's just not a great deck, you know? So I'm up here against a Samut, and you'll notice that I'm using the Demogoth. So the cool thing about the Demogoth, if you did not know, is that the Demogoth is going to kill itself. But the cool piece about it, not that it kills itself, that's not the cool thing. That's very sad. But the cool thing is that it's going to be killing your supports and creatures. And if you actually run this thing with pests, then it will actually destroy your pests instead of destroying itself. Now, Samut makes a big kid play over here and plays a Sarulf, which kind of scared the beans out of me because I'm running a pesty deck, and Sarulf is the perfect counter to pests. So I'm going to use Liliana's first ability here, and you'll see that I target the Poet's Quill. And so there were 2 creatures that I could have chosen, but those 2 creatures have now both been dumped into my graveyard. This is important because I have my recursion in hand. So this means that I'm going to be able to freely get them back from my graveyard for casting that Unbreakable Bond, and I'm going to be able to give it lifelink. So now we're going to go ahead and play a game. We're going to see if Sarulf is going to get rid of my pests. And the answer is no. Sarulf is not getting rid of the pests. So this makes me wonder if I can just sort of freely cast my spells here and then try and get rid of the Sarulf. Because if it does not It's going to swing into the Demagoth for sure, right? And so the Demagoth is going to kill it unless if Samut gets like some kind of crazy sort of cascade or plays another Seraph or, something. By the way, all these little pings of damage to Samut are pests. If you have not yet played with pests, you should play with pests because they are ridiculously powerful. So there, the Demagoth is going to go ahead and eat one of my pests, which isn't a problem. It's going to make me gain life. It does mean that I get to ping Samut for just a little bit less, but that's okay. I'm actually going to go ahead and destroy one of my own pests here so that I can get 3 more pests from casting a spell because my little lifelinky witch over here has Magecraft to summon 3 pests every time I cast a spell. And so now things aren't looking too good for Samut because, well, I've got a lot of pests down. Samut does play the Prismatic Bridge, so I am, at the very least, I'm up against a fairly well-constructed deck between Seraph and the Prismatic Bridge. It's not like I'm up against, some kind of terrible deck or something here. But nonetheless, Samut really doesn't have a very good path to victory here, because I'm going to get even more pests this turn, like a lot more pests, from this pest summoning, which is going to make 2 pests on its own, and then my witch is going to make 3 pests, and then I'm going to get a Poet's Quill to give the Demogoth lifelink. I'm going to go ahead and take the Introduction to Prophecy, because that's another spell that I can cast, and then all my pests are going to start pinging Samut. So really the only option for Samut to not lose here is to play something like the Great Aurora, or something like Ruinous Ultimatum, but I'm thinking that that's probably not going to happen here without a massive cascade, and Samut doesn't get it. So this is no matter what game over. Yes, I only used one of Liliana's abilities once. I will be showcasing her abilities more, but in subsequent gameplay. But the key is to notice just how effective the first ability is. The first ability is really what set this all up and allowed it to happen. So let's go ahead and jump to the next match. Alrighty, so match number 2 is going to be a perfect showcase of Professor Onyx's abilities. Now, this deck that you see is actually my favorite deck that I've played with her, apart from any of my Extus creations. This deck is absolutely phenomenal and is very, very fun to play. It gave me a use for Nightmare Shepherd, which is really cool. And then Garuda is going to pair really well with Professor Onyx's abilities, as Garuda is going to mill 8 cards from both players' decks. Garuda is a phenomenal card to put in a Professor Onyx deck, because as you start dumping a bunch of things into both players' graveyards, Professor Onyx's third ability is going to deal damage based on the number of creatures in both graveyards. So you're able to do some pretty wacky things with Garuda. Now here I'm going to use my first ability. I have a lot of different choices at my disposal here, but ultimately there is a best option. That option is Emergent Ultimatum. And because I'm using my first ability, I'm going to get 2 Emergent Ultimatums out of it, because it's going to copy it. So naturally, I'm going to go ahead, take the copied version of the Ultimatum, and put that ahead of the non-copy version, because the copy has more mana. Koth, for some reason, does not want to make these 5 loyalty matches that I keep offering him, so I might as well just keep giving him that option. I get an Eerie Ultimatum here, which I find kind of comical, because now I've got 2 Eerie Ultimatums and 2 Emergent Ultimatums in my hand, but it's really no big deal. I'm going to get a whole bunch of stuff, and you'll see that as the Burning Rune Demons come in, because I've got so many high mana cost cards in the deck, whenever I make the choice as to which card I'm going to get, dirty things happen. Now here I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to check out my graveyard. I'm going to see which of the ultimatums I want for free. And so now here I'm going to use my second ability to get a free Emergent Ultimatum, because why not? And get rid of the first card in Koth's hand. So at this stage, I'm really liking what I've got on the board, because I've got some serious sillies going on, and I'm getting so much free stuff out of this, which is beautiful. As someone who loves free stuff, I'm just going to go ahead and say yes please to this. And I've already got my second ability again, because I've got a heck of a lot of gem conversion too. So now here's the cool thing, right? I'm going to destroy Garuda with the Burning Rune. If you're wondering why, it's because the Nightmare Shepherd is going to cause Garuda to enter the battlefield again as a 1/1 token. So basically what it means is that I just get to mill another 8 cards from both of our libraries, which is exactly what I wanted from that particular situation. So now I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to load up my hand. I've got so much that I can cast. Look at this. I'm going to undo the Emergent Ultimatum. I'll be able to cast that this turn too, which is crazy. It should not be understated just how good Professor Onyx's mana gains are. So if you're wondering what I was doing there, I was actually checking my loyalty to see if how many more matches I needed to be able to get my third ability. Here I want Garuda of those two particular options because Garuda is phenomenal. And then here I'm going to go ahead and let the Ruinous Ultimatum deal 22 damage to Koth, which is beautiful. And then I'm going to use an emergent. Look at this nonsense. Just absolute ridiculousness. And then I'm going to destroy Garuda here. This is obviously not the best play in the world because I could have killed Koth, but I wanted to kill Koth with style points, right? There just comes a time sometimes when you just got to kill your opponent with style. And the style that I want to kill my opponent with is my third ability. So we've seen the first ability, we've seen the second ability, and now we're going to see the third ability in action. So we're going to get to see the third ability do dirty things to Koth's hand. Unfortunately, I can't cast all of this stuff that I have, but Koth's hand goes, and then Koth goes, because boom, the ability kills. And that's all she wrote. In conclusion, Professor Onyx very well might wind up being the best Planeswalker to come out of Strixhaven. This Planeswalker is phenomenal. For me, she is absolutely an S-tier Planeswalker. Granted, I happen to have every card in Standard, except for some Vanguards, but most of those are not worth it. But this Planeswalker is worth it. Now, if you don't have a big collection, like I mentioned earlier, you can pass on this Planeswalker for now, but I would recommend that everyone at some point picks up this Planeswalker. Either pick her up right now from the vault, as she is available for the next few days to buy here, or you can pick her up for 295 mana crystals when she becomes available in the vault for crystals. She is 100% worth it. Now, granted, I also love monocolor Planeswalkers, but Professor Onyx is one of the best monocolor Planeswalkers in the game. Hands down, bar few. She is amazing. There are a number of events that I'm very excited to play her in, especially a Timeless Voyage with that bottom node. I feel like she's going to be a perfect Planeswalker to put there, because when you get the full mana to your hand and your opponent gets full mana to their hand, that's a node that I know makes a lot of players lose a lot of points in a coalition event. This Planeswalker makes it so that your opponent basically doesn't get mana to their hand, because you then just use your third ability, because you're also both going to get full loyalty, and you just dump their hand and it's gone. And then you just laugh at your opponent like, what? Right? Because they're really not going to be able to do anything about it. So she's an amazing Planeswalker. Once again, highly recommend you pick her up, either for money or for crystals from the vault. She's 100% worth it. For me, she is 100% an S-tier Planeswalker. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.